Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Deborah K. Frontiera grew up in Lake Linden. She taught in Houston Public Schools from 1985 until 2008, and then taught creative writing part-time for Houston's WITS, Writers in the Schools program. Upon retirement from teaching, she and her husband moved back to her beloved UP, but they head south during part of the winter to be with their daughters and grandchildren. She has written for children, young adults, and adults, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry.
Tonight, we have with us Deborah K. Frontiera, who is about to talk about her classic book, a 2-award-winning book. The Purple Dragonfly, is it called?
Award. Mm-hmm.
Yep, Purple Dragonfly Award and a UP Notable Classic, Living on Sisu. I cannot recommend this book enough. I mean, if I'm not selling you on it and you haven't read it, I think after Deb talks about it, you're going to want to read it. And if for those of you who might have missed it, a few years back, we got some grant money. We gave a copy of the book to every 5th and 6th grader here in Crystal Falls. And one little girl came and found me. She read that. She went home from school, sat down and read the book all night till she was done. So that there's no better. I think that's better than even getting the awards, Deb, in my mind. So
sometimes it is when I hear occasionally back from people who've read it, and how it changed them. Two in particular, I had a woman who came early on and bought a copy for her granddaughter. And then she got back in touch with me to get a second copy because she found herself writing in the margins, "This is like your great uncle so-and-so. This is like your great aunt thus and such." And she was writing all these other family stories into it. And she figured she better have a clean copy.
Okay.
And then last summer, I was at the Calumet Farm Market and this young man came up to me and he said, "Oh, you wrote Living on Sisu?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You came to our school when I was in 7th grade and I never forgot it." And I thought, wow.
Yeah. No, it is. It's so good. And no one could deserve this award more than you. I'm glad you're here tonight to talk to us about it. So take it away, Deb. Tell us all about your book.
I decided I wasn't going to do anything fancy with PowerPoint and all of that stuff. I just want to share with you some of the really offbeat, more unusual sources that I came across, and also how a lot of experiences from my own life and family stories wove their way into the book too, from things from my grandparents and a great aunt and a few other things like that I just want to share with you. I grew up in Lake Linden, which is 4 miles down the hill from Calumet, and at the edge of the Traprock Valley. And the Traprock Valley was where so many of the Finnish immigrants, their goal was to work in the mines long enough to save up money, buy farmland in the Traprock, because it reminded them of the Kalevala in Finland. And that was their goal, to become landowners, because in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Russia still ruled Finland. And if you were an unemployed male, it was very likely that unless you could get out of the country, you were going to get conscripted into the Tsar's army so that you could go shoot peasants who were pretty much like you. If you were a second son, you were just plain out of luck. The first son got any land that was in the family, and anybody beyond that was, out the door, go find something to do with your life. And that was why so many Finnish men left Finland by the thousands and came to Upper Michigan, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and then out in Astoria, Washington, and other places in the United States that reminded them of Finland, and all kind of along the same longitudinal or latitudinal belt. And so I grew up with a lot of Finnish friends, And I also grew up hearing stories about the strike, especially the Italian Hall disaster. My mother had a lady working for her a couple days a week, house cleaning, laundry, stuff like that, who was a French Canadian descent, and she was orphaned during the Spanish flu epidemic, and then always had to earn a living for ourselves. But she was always, and I can't do her French accent like she does, but it went something like this: "Don't you never go yell fire in a crowded room and like all them little kids got killed." You know, and that was my first experience of knowing about the strike and the Italian Hall disaster. As I got older, I began to realize a little bit more about my collective heritage. My father taught math and mining engineering at Michigan Tech, and if I was in the car with him and we were driving along 26 from Lake Linden over to Houghton, he was sure to explain to me again about the stamp mill and the dredging process in Mason. And yeah, I was 10, 11, 12, until I got my own driver's license. And that was about as much interest to me as, yeah, blah, 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 tish, tish. And I'd tune him out. And then I started reading more. Oh, that's what my dad was trying to drill into my brain all those years ago. So I grew up with these myths about the fact that the doors opened inward in the Italian Hall and all this other stuff that later I found out was absolutely false. I didn't get interested in writing about the strike until the summer of 2000. My mother was ill and couldn't use the tickets she'd bought to the Calumet Theater to a consigned, I don't know if consigned is the word, but they hired people to write an opera about the strike. And so my mother gave me her tickets, and a friend and I went in her and my dad's place. And outside the theater that night, they had a little stand selling this book called Rebels on the Range by Arthur W. Turner. And I bought a copy that night and I started reading it and getting into great detail and thinking, wow, there's a lot here. I didn't realize all this went on. And then as I began to look around for more information, I found there was a lot of material for adults to read. And there was nothing for young people. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it from a young person's point of view, so young people can read it and find out their heritage in a way that will draw them into the story. Not that it doesn't appeal to adults as well. That was just a bonus that I wasn't planning on. And so I spent the first 3 years doing nothing but research and reading everything I could get my hands on. I would go over to Tech Archives and take notes from 100-year-old issues of the Daily Mining Gazette, or I would go over to Finlandia Archives and comb through their photographs, which is where I found the pictures of the young girl in the front. They asked me, what are you looking for? I said, family groups and portraits of young women. And they said, anything more specific? I said, I'll know when I find it. And when I saw this, I thought, that's Emma a few years down the road. And at Michigan Tech Archives, I found the cover photo, and the young girl on the side, the way her hand is up to her mouth, I could almost feel what she was saying, like, what kind of a terrible thing is going to happen today? What's my family going to do? I could feel her anxiety. And I said, that's got to be my cover. And I got permission to just take home a photocopy of that photograph. And whenever I was writing and I needed to get into Emma's frame of mind, I would look at that photograph again. I don't know who the woman in the picture is. It's a young girl. Nobody knew who she was. It wasn't labeled. The photographer, which happened to be John W. Nera, was taking a picture of the strikers in their march. And this young woman just happened to be standing there on the sidelines. But in my mind, that became Emma. And I got to know Emma. And I did a lot of things that most researchers wouldn't do. Or I don't know, maybe some researchers would, but my husband certainly thought I was crazy. When I decided that Emma was going to go to work for somebody in Laurium, I started driving up and down the streets of Laurium, and I happened to be going up and down Kearsarge Street, which is starts right at the corner of 26 and where 41 Lumber is. And I just drove up and down, and I saw maybe half a dozen houses in several blocks, almost one per block, that I said, oh, that could be where Emma's employer lives. Oh, wait a minute, that could too, which was what I was looking for. I didn't want to settle on a specific house or say to anybody that it was a specific house, just a house on Kearsarge Street. And then I thought, well, I better know how long it's going to take Emma to walk from her house in Swedetown over to Kearsarge Street. And this is where I got really lucky. I was browsing around this little bookstore in Calumet called Artist Books, little used bookstore. And for $1, I found this little pamphlet book that was a history of Swedetown. And I was glad to pay for that $1. And it had a map of Calumet, Laurium, and the little tiny little 4 or 6 block area that was Swedetown, and the streets in between. And now the streets are different. Now there's 3 or 4 have been added since then, but this one showed me where they were at that time. So I could figure out what Emma's route would have been. And then there was an individual map of all of Swedetown itself with the different streets and the pasture labeled for her cow Daisy. And I walked up and down those streets, and I saw one house that I could tell had never been altered in any way from the little salt box houses that were built by the company for miners to rent. And there was a car in the driveway. And so I walked up to the door, tapped on the door, and this teenage kid answered the door. And I said, hi, I'm Debbie Frontiera. I'm doing some research for a book I'm writing here in Swedetown, and my character lives in a house like this. Would you mind terribly if I came in to kind of see how the inside is laid out? He said, sure, come on in. The stairs were about this wide. It was almost like going up a ladder to the upstairs. They were very steep and very narrow. And I thought, whoa. And I got up and I heard these 2 tiny little bedrooms. And one of them was facing, towards the, what is forest again now, but is also partly meadow. But I could picture what it was like 100 years earlier when it was mostly meadow and the forest was farther away. And I thought, okay, yeah, this is the way Emma's house faces. And then in describing where she lived, I actually picked a vacant lot because they are a fictional family based on real people. So I didn't want to, have a real person's house. There were also lists in here from the census of who lived where and when they lived there. And there were 3 Neami families that lived in Swedetown. So I thought, oh, this is perfect. And there I was, $1 in a used bookstore. Oh. Who would have thought? Another little fun piece that I picked up was around in 2000 was a little pamphlet on the various historic churches in Calumet. And I was familiar with a lot of them, but it gave some nice little background ones. And I thought, okay, which one of these is Emma's? Well, there's the National Lutheran Church, and there's the First Apostolic Lutheran Church, and there's the Norwegian Lutheran Church. And I knew a little bit about the Norwegian church from a family story because my father had told me that, his father, my grandfather, and the great-grandfather that had immigrated from Norway into Canada and then into Minnesota, that his brother had been a Lutheran missionary, And he had once preached in that Lorium, in that Norwegian Lutheran church in Calumet. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. That's another tie into my family. And so then, but I actually asked Jim Curti, who was at that time the editor of the Finnish American Reporter, and I said, what would be most likely for a Finnish immigrant family who arrived in 1900, 1901, which church would they have most likely gone to? And he said that it would probably be the Apostolic Lutheran Church, which are their more conservative branch of the Lutheran Church. He gave me all kinds of good information on that. Any rate, so I chose that, not because it was close to Swedetown, because it's quite a walk, but because that would be the most likely. And that church, I don't know if you can see it very well, it's no longer a church. It's now the Habitat for Humanity Restore.
Hold it up a little bit higher. We just saw the very tip of it.
How's that?
There we go. There we go. Okay, thank you.
The building still looks the same, but now the inside where the sanctuary was is the Habitat for Humanity Restore. So it's put to another good use. So I had all these little things that, you don't always run into unless you're just walking around town noticing things. But at any rate, I did one day have my husband, I parked my car on about in the middle of Kearsarge Street. And then he drove me up to the top of this little hill in Swedetown. And then I said, okay, bye, see you later. And I walked to Kearsarge Street by the streets that would have been there at that time from the historical map. And it took me exactly 45 minutes. So then the first day that Emma walks to work at Mr. Edwards' house, instead of saying 45 minutes, I said, it was still a little bit dark, which it would have been in September. It doesn't get light until like right about 7:15, 7:30. And she's got to leave to get there by 7:30. So she has to leave about 6:45. And so it would still have been dark. And then by the time she got there, there would have been long shadows on the ground. So I was able to use things like that because Emma doesn't have a watch. They probably didn't even have a clock in their house. They weren't, these were poor people. So I was able to put together things like that from my own experience. And when I when I had gone back to Houston that fall, and I was with my Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators group, I was telling them about this experience of knocking on the door and going into this strange person's house. And they said, you went into a stranger's house? You just walked into a total stranger's house? I said, yeah, that's the UP. That's like we are. It's different, It's a different planet. It's a whole different world up here. You don't have to be worried about inviting a stranger into your house or walking into a stranger's house. So that was kind of fun. And then some other things with my family. My grandparents were married in 1902, and they spent the first years of their marriage in the mining camps in Mexico, the silver camps. And because my grandfather on my mother's side was also a mining engineer. But for whatever reason, he chose not to work in the copper country at that time. They were looking for their own little adventure. And so I knew that they came back after the strike because I could not find their names in the polk directories at Michigan Tech Archive. The polk directories are what you had before phone books. They were lists of people's names and where they lived. And I could not find Lewis Chester Pierce in the 1913 polk directory. I found him in the 1916 directory. So, and they didn't do a directory every year. So somewhere between there, my grandparents came back. And my mother always told the story of how my grandmother would hire these young girls from out in the Traprock Valley. She happened upon the oldest girl of a family named Aitama, hired her to come and work for her, and taught her the finer points of cooking and housekeeping and sewing and all of the things that a young woman needed to know, until that young woman found a beau, got married, and my grandmother hired the next younger sister and went through this whole family of Aitama girls. So I knew that that was the kind of people my grandparents were. They would take in this young girl, feed her, clothe her, and she worked for them, and then move on to the next sister. So that became the basis of Chester and Jesse in the story that Emma works for. Now, my grandparents were in Lake Linden, so I wasn't going to use the last name Pierce, but I did give them the first names Chester and Jesse in honor of my grandparents. Another thing I found out after I'd published the book was that my grandfather's sister, actually his sister-in-law, it was his brother's wife, she was involved with the Methodist Church in Lake Linden, and on Christmas Eve of 1913, she and the other Methodist ladies were delivering charity baskets to the striking miners' families. So that was another connection of my family to what was going on at that time, of people who were trying to be neutral about the strike. They maybe didn't like everything the strike stood for, but these were truly good Christian people who said, these people are in need. They are starving. We need to help them. And so they did. And it was kind of neat to know that was part of my family's heritage. When I first started doing research, my older sister said, well, why are you having her Finnish? Why don't you have her be, Cornish? Because we come from Cornish background. We come from mining people. And I said, well, two reasons. By the time of our grandparents and our family, the Cornish people had already climbed up the economic ladder. They first came working underground, and then they managed to save enough that their kids were better off than they were, and then the next generation a little better off, the way it is with immigrant families. So that by the time of the strike, most of the Cornish people had moved on up. They were the captains and the business owners, and it was the newest people, and those were the Finns. And there were more Finns than any other one ethnic group. There were, I don't know, at one point I found out there were people from 40 different countries whose kids went to the Calumet schools. 40 countries. I can't imagine what it would be like teaching in those circumstances with all those different languages. But there were more Finns than any other one group. So I told my sister, that's why I have a Finnish immigrant family. And she said, well, that makes sense. And another good thing was my good Finnish friend, Nancy Lampa, Lampa, good Finnish name. And not her married name, of course, but we were sitting at coffee at her house out in the Traprock Valley. And she was making ustua that morning. And I said, Nancy, I'm going to go get my notebook. You tell me what you're doing, because I'm going to take notes on this. And the notes that I took with her that day became the scene where Emma's mother is teaching her how to make ustua, which is the squeaky cheese. And so, I had all this information from people that were doing it. And then I did ask Nancy if I could use her last name, her maiden name. And because she said that she knew that her parents, her grandparents had been farming in the Traprock Valley all of those years. So it made sense that there was a Lampa family out in the Traprock Valley for Emma's brother to go and work for in the summer. So all of that stuff is based in fact, in families that I knew and what was going on there, and the way people helped each other out, and the way among all the different immigrant families, one person had a cow, another raised a pig, somebody else had chickens, and they all traded food products with each other. I give you some of my ustum, you give me, the eggs. I give you the skimmed, the whey from the cheese and keep feeding your pig, and then we get some of the bacon in the fall. And this was the way their economy worked. They had to, because they didn't have enough cash to do all these things. And so all of that entered into Emma's family and the world in which she lived. Another thing, and this was from my own experience too, occasionally a blizzard would start up in the middle of a school day and we would all get sent home at lunchtime. And I had to walk north from Lake Linden School to my house. And the winds were almost always out of the northwest when we had a blizzard. And rather than face into the wind and have all of that snow stinging our faces, we would turn around and walk backwards, so that the back of our coat with the hood and the scarf, that was to the wind, and our faces were more protected. And I have Emma doing that, walking backwards up the hill in Swedetown because there's a blizzard. So a lot of things like that really came out of my experience and out of my grandparents and my mother's descriptions of family stories and things like that. And another thing that I found, and this was, I never did this myself, but we did something similar. In a biography of Annie Clement that I found, there was a scene in there where the kids would jump out the upstairs windows into the snow when the snow got to enough depth that they wouldn't get hurt. And so that was the big entertainment in the winter, was let's go jump out the windows. Well, I didn't jump out any upstairs windows, but just slightly up the highway from where I grew up, there was a billboard, you know, those old billboards, and the kind with a walkway about this wide for when they went out to change the papering on the billboard. And it extended out a little bit, like, okay, here was the billboard, and it came out, and there was a little slant down that way, a little like hill. So that you started out walking on the ground and then went onto the walkway. And then the further you went out the walkway, the farther up you were from the ground. And so we would go and walk out there and jump into the snow off of that. And we were, you know, each step farther out there with a little bit bigger drop. You know, dare you, double dog dare you, all of that, things that kids do. So yeah, I had personal experience with jumping from a height into soft snow and knowing what it felt like to get your boots stuck in the bottom. And things like that, that those went into Emma too. And then at one point, a local historian told me that there was a woman out in Painesdale who was a child during the strike. She was 8 years old at the time of the strike, and she had been in the Italian Hall, and he gave me her contact information. So I called and asked if I could come out and speak to her. And Mrs. Butina said, yes, Mary Butina, yes, come in. She was 97 at that time, and she still remembered it like it was yesterday. And I was kicking myself for not bringing a cassette tape player and recording everything, but I frantically took notes into my notebook instead, and just got her experiences, not just about the strike and about her experience at the Italian Hall, but you know, what she did for fun, what school was like, what she did with her friends, what they did during summer vacation. And then I just projected all of that to a slightly older child, because an 8-year-old would not be capable of writing a journal. I needed Emma to be a little bit older and more capable. But Mary Butina's experiences were very much a part of Emma. I also lucked onto a source in at Finlandia Archives. Back in the 1970s, they had sent students of what was then Suomi College out with cassette tape players and lists of questions out to the elderly of the community at that time, who were young people or young adults or whatever during the time of the strike, and recorded their oral histories and then transcribed and indexed it. This had to be a huge project. I can't imagine all the hours and hours of work that went into the the interviews and the transcriptions and the indexing, because you could look up by topic. I could look up the strike or look up childhood experiences, and then say to the archivist, okay, I want so-and-so's oral history from page thus and such. And they'd bring it out and I could read it and take notes. And so I got a lot of really good stuff that way too, because I wanted to make this as authentic as possible. I didn't want to stretch it so far that it was a novel. I wanted it to be accurate to what it was really like to live back then. And I'm glad I did, because the year after it was published, I published it in 2008. And in 2009, when I got the Purple Dragonfly Award, it was like, yes, 3 years of research and 2 more years of writing. It was worth it. I did my homework and I brought her to life. Okay. Oh, another thing I did was I have a cousin who's was a dairy farmer for many years. He's now retired, but I even called him up and I said, "Hey, Bill, how long does it take a cow to make a calf?" And he said, "Same as people, 9 months." And so he told me about this process of. He said he usually quits milking a cow about 2 months before the cow gives birth to the calf. And then he waits a little while because he wants to make sure the calf is well fed and ready to start eating, hay and stuff before he begins to milk that cow again. And that's called freshening. And so that led to the scenes where Emma's cow is, getting ready to give birth. And my cousin told me that he keeps these elaborate calendars, a different calendar for every cow. And he said one time he goofed up and he milked this one cow straight through. He's kind of hard on the cow, but she got along okay. And so that let me write that scene where, Emma's wondering, why were they still milking Daisy? Because isn't her calf about ready? And her brother says, yeah, well, everybody's sacrificing something. Daisy got to do her part because we need the milk. And so all of these things came out of real experiences by some person or other. And I was glad I did it that way, because I felt like it was, very authentic in how I portrayed this family and their struggles through the strike, and the way Emma perceived the strike, her decision to read several different newspapers because she was finding they were all different. Gee, does that sound like it's any different today? And so there were just so many things like that I enjoyed the process of, and then bringing it to life. And I want to tell you that since it got the award, and I turned rights over to Modern History Press, because they had the ability to do a hardback and an ebook and an audio version, that I didn't have the funds for that the first time around. I could not have done that. And when I had this back in February, I had a Zoom meeting with Victor Volkman and the woman who was going to do the narrating and myself, because I had to teach this narrator how to pronounce all the Finnish names and some of the other terms and things that are in the book, and hoping that she'd get it a little bit right. And so I went through parts of the glossary, all the names of all the characters, the Finnish phrases that were in there. And then I explained to her, I said, the dialogue is really important. I said, if you don't quite get it with the narration, don't worry about it, because Emma is also trying to Americanize herself. She's trying to be educated. She's trying to do the best she can with English. So, the dialogue is more important. And I told her, I said, with Marie Beauchamp, Emma's friend, who is French Canadian, I said, Marie is going to say mama and papa, whereas Emma is going to say mama and papa. because that's the difference between the two languages. And she got that, and I was really pleased. And when I listened to the chapters to approve them, I thought, yeah, she nailed Emma. She brought Emma to life just like I was hearing Emma's voice. It's really great, the audio version. I'm not sure if it's available yet, but if you're into audiobooks, just keep watching on, the different platforms that sell those, because she did a super good job, a really good job of bringing Emma and all the other characters to life. She really acted the story, not just read it. She performed it, and I was really pleased with that. So that's something to look forward to that I would never have been able to do on my own with the original, self-published, independently published version. I had a grant from Dr. Robert Nera that covered most of the layout and the design. And in the very beginning, I borrowed $5,000 from my dad to get the first 2,000 printed. We did an offset print run to begin with. And I faithfully paid my dad the interest every year. I never did get around to the principal of the loan. And when he passed away in 2014, let's see, just a few years after the book came out, I told my sister, who was the executor, I said, now, don't forget, I owed this to Dad, and you need to take that off my portion because, that's fair. And she said, Deb, forget it. All of us borrowed money from Dad at one point or another. So my loan got forgiven, but, and I knew I didn't have any chance to do that at this point in my life. So I was really glad that, Modern History Press was willing to take it over and do those things that I could not possibly have done, and, bring Emma's world to life in an audiobook. So I'm just looking at my cheat sheet here. Oh, another story that I wanted to tell you was when I got ready to write the scene of the Italian Hall disaster and the cry of fire and all of the confusion and everything. I had the whole book written except for that scene. And I kept saying, I got to finish this book. It's time to finish it. And I went back, and I even had a copy of the coroner's inquest with the statements from all of the witnesses, in addition to Mary Buttina's memories. I had all this information, and it was all in my head, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to do that scene. I couldn't make myself do it. So in some ways, the way I started that scene, and I'm going to read you just a little bit of this, if you don't mind, because Emma's avoiding it too. Thursday, December 25. It cannot be Christmas. It doesn't feel anything like it should. I wish yesterday were a horrid dream. I want to wake up, but I am awake. Then Sunday, December 28. We buried most of them today. Maybe I am in that dark place too. My head hurts so much I cannot think. I do not want to think. Monday, December 29. I woke up crying again last night. Mama came in and held me close. Jenny and Katri did not even wake up. I don't know why. They were there too, but they did not go to the funerals. Only Papa and I went because of my friend Lempi. And then finally on Tuesday, December 30th, she starts out, I sat in my bedroom window looking out at the snow and the long shadows on the ground, and I stared at the dark woods that I love in spring and summer, and watching the dark night steal over everything, and how I want to go to somewhere warm and light. I stared at my journal. Papa came up and set down the oil lamp and rubbed my back. He put a blanket around me. I had not realized I was shivering. For a while he said nothing. Then we talked in Finnish. Why did you first start writing about the strike at your journal? He asked me. I wanted to sort it all out, I said. Well, maybe if you sort this out too, writing it here, it will quit hurting your head. Life goes on. You have to go on with it. He rubbed my back for a while longer. I wished he would put his arms around me like Mr. Edwards did when he came to see if I was all right, but that is not Papa's way of showing he loves me. Papa left the lamp next to me and handed me a newly sharpened pencil. Then he went back downstairs. I heard him tell everybody I could keep the lamp lit as long as I needed to and to leave me alone for a while so I could sort things out. So, in a way, that was me telling myself, write the scene, just do it. And I actually wrote it between Christmas and New Year's. I'm going to ignore that phone. Of that one year that I was finishing up the book, and I went back into my office, which was a corner of my bedroom, and I told my kids and my husband, leave me alone. I just need to be alone. I need to write the scene. And then I just let it pour out, and it was all mixed up, just like Emma would have. You skip from one thing to another. Oh, wait, I forgot this. I forgot that. You jump around when you're in confusion. And that was the way I felt when my mother died in 2001. I'd pick up something and I'd put it down over there, and then I'd try to go help my dad with something else. And then I'd remember, oh, I was doing this. And that's the way you are when you're in that situation. So that was the way I needed to write that scene. And I wrote the whole thing, foomp, just let it all pour out. And when I took it to my critique group the following week and read it to them, their mouths dropped open. And one critique partner said, you nailed it. Don't change a thing. It was the hardest scene in my life that I've ever written, but it's also the only scene that all I did was, line editing for the commas and the periods and the spelling and things like that. I didn't change a word of it from first draft to final. It's the only scene that's ever come out like that. So, yeah, I was in Emma's head and she was in my head. So at this point, I'd like to just open it for questions and see if there's anything else you'd like to know from me.
Sounds good. Go ahead there, Mary.
Well,
you have to
like
unmute.
To say that
Unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think maybe that's why I enjoyed the book so much, because it was so real, and I could tell that you had drawn, from your own family and your background and everything. And I did have a question for you. You said you go to Houston in the winter?
Yeah.
Is that
Actually,
true?
when I first started writing it, we were still living down there. We lived in Houston, Texas from 1985 until 2019. And we would come up to the UP in the summers because we were both teachers.
Okay.
So we could get in 8 to 10 weeks of cooler weather. And so I would actually
understand that.
Yeah, I was actually working on the writing of it in Houston at the time. And then
Okay.
we lived down there, and I taught English as second language kindergarten. I had kids who were immigrant children too. So
well,
Okay,
we have a connection because my dad's family has 3 generations of roots in Houston. And I remember going there to visit his parents, my grandparents, and also later got to meet some of his cousins. And I started delving into the family history of how they all ended up in Houston, Texas, and just recently revised and published a book. Actually, there's going to be a sequel too, but I could really relate to how you were going to people and asking them questions, and how you just stumbled onto things sometimes that really, and I stumbled onto one of his cousins that I never knew, who was the keeper of the family stories.
Oh, wow.
And they also made available to me a diary that had been kept by my great grandmother of her later life in Houston. So it was talking about back when the streets were made of dirt, and it was the horses were getting stuck in the mud, and all of the different things that happened, and then the impacts of the Great Galveston hurricane, and the World War I and its impact on the Germans. I actually have a copy of my grandfather's application for citizenship after the Sedition Act was passed. He had already been in America for 50 years and had married an American, and he still had to apply for citizenship. Yeah. So I'm going to show you the cover, Evelyn, because I'm going to send it to you when the sequel comes out.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's called.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah,
if we don't take care of those,
well, but
if we don't take care of those family histories, they're lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you,
was
Mary.
the whole thing. Go ahead.
I was gonna say thank you. Go ahead with your last comment, and then we're gonna have the other Mary has her hand up too.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say, you know, that was, I started by doing just a standard family history, and it just, you know, I needed to turn it into a story, which is what you did with Emma.
Yeah.
And I can really relate to that too, because then people can relate to it, and I really related to Emma, even though I've been to Calumet, but you know, I was I was a troll. I lived 19 years in Lower Michigan. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Mary. Other Mary, Mary V.
Unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. Okay, in your left-hand corner there. Oh, okay. So in your left-hand corner, Mary V, there's a button that says audio. Wait, no, it's not the audio. Well, where is it?
Mine is a little microphone with
it looks like a little microphone right in the corner.
And you click on it and it'll unmute you.
Yeah, if you click on it, it will unmute you. While Mary's trying to do that, and it's on the left-hand side of your computer, right down, right in the very corner, it says audio. Just click on that.
What if you do something here?
Or I don't know if that'll work, but does anyone else, while she's trying to figure that out, does anyone else have a comment or a question we could do while, and Mary, I'll write you some notes in the chat too. No,
I have one.
Okay, Tyler.
I just want to say that I read the book when it first came out, I think within the first year. And the thing that has stuck with me the most about the book that I think you did a wonderful job getting correct was I was just amazed by how here she is about 12 years old and her father's out of work. And it's not even a question. She's just like, I'm going to go out and work and help support the family. And I can't imagine a kid of that age doing that today. I'm not sure I would have done that myself when I was her age, but that's what they did back then. And I know, like my grandpa, when he was 14, he went out and started working to support the family. And I just think it's really amazing that she cared about her family that much. And I just really applaud you for getting that detail in there, making her believable in that way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. I just sent Mary some notes in the chat. I don't know if she can read them. And if she still can't unmute, she could write in the chat. Mary, you could put in the chat your question. If you just click on chat on the bottom of your screen, you will be able to write a message that we can read. Any other comments from our viewers tonight? All right, Sue Harrison.
There we go. Yeah, this book was so real. And I think that's what Mary Frances said to us, how real it is. And it's such a gift. It is such a gift, Deb, because you have stopped time and you've made it available to generations. And your main character is so true to her own time and true to her age, which I think is difficult to do. And I'm just so impressed with it. And I thank you for writing it. Thank you for writing it.
You're welcome.
It's just amazing.
Okay. I'm still giving Mary some pointers here. I think she clearly clicked the video button because now we've lost her picture, but now we can't get her question. uh yes. You know what I want to say, and maybe someone else is going to jump in too. What I liked tonight, Deb, is that we've done, I don't know how many of these UP notable Zoom talks now, 56 or something, I think Victor said. We're getting up there.
My
But
God.
I really like what you did tonight, something different. I don't recall any other author, and I've only missed a couple, that really went through that research process and how these little things just fell in your lap, and I can't help but think, you were meant to write this book. I mean, why would that Swedetown book be right there for $1? I mean, it's like little miracles, like little people, little writing fairies out there planting all these seeds so you could grow this book that we could read. So I really appreciate you kind of taking us through that journey of how it came to be. And I think and all the things you did really to make it very real, like you were saying, the walking and stuff, but just even the research, all that heavy research, it really made a difference. It's a great tale.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if we have any other comments. I'm hoping Mary V will, she can always write me an email and I can write it, I can we can get your question answered or your comment shared with Debbie, after the talk. But is there any other final comments or questions? Oh yeah, one more for Sue.
I thought of something I was wondering. So Debbie, do you speak any of the languages that were spoken then? Did you run into Finnish language problems? What did you do with that part of your research?
I grew up with a lot of Finnish friends, and of course anybody who's Yooper, you've already got the accent. It's part of who we are. But Jim Curti was a huge help with all of that. I got a lot of the phrases that I used from him, and then he was also willing to read through my manuscript and make sure that I had the little umlauts over the O's and the A's where they needed to be and not where they didn't need to be. And so he was just a huge help with that. And helping me with the pronunciation and a few things like that. And from being an ESL teacher, I knew that, there are different sounds in different languages. And I was very aware, for instance, from ESL teaching that Finnish does not have the TH, the sound. And they almost always celebrate the D. It's not the table and the chair. It's the table, the chair.
Yeah.
And whereas French Canadians, like the woman who worked for my mother, they do not have the TH sound either, but they tend to substitute T. So if my mother's employee was saying the days of the week, it would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay.
Just with the T. And so I was aware of those things. And Spanish doesn't have the TH either. And so all the little Spanish speaking kids that I had, they would also substitute a D. So I had enough experience with other people speaking other languages to kind of get a handle on that. And, picking up the accents. Speaking of accents, oh boy, did I get it when I first went down to Houston. That northern accent, Well, my first year of teaching, I had this one woman who came in from the district office to critique, my lesson and help me become a better teacher and all of that associated baloney. And the only criticism she had at me, she said, "Did you know you always say yeah instead of yes?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, Well, it's not grammatically incorrect, but you really should try to set a better example for the teacher. And I'm thinking, I want to keep my job. How do I answer this? So I finally said, do you tell all the native Texan teachers that they should quit saying y'all? And then she looked at me like, what? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm Scandinavian. I'm from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I can no more quit saying yeah than a Texan can quit saying y'all. You know?
It looks like Mary's unmuted. Mary. Where is she? She's there. She's unmuted. Did you want to ask a question, Mary V? Well, that's weird.
I still can't hear her.
I can't hear her either. Her mouth's moving and the mute button isn't on her name.
Must be
So
the
maybe
volume's turned down.
Must be something really wrong there. I'm not sure what, though. Well, maybe while she's figuring out, I was just going to say, I can't wait to hear your audiobook because a few years back, Women of the Copper Country was a UP notable.
Mhm.
And my mom and I both listened to that on audiobook. And somebody trained the reader to say all kinds of Finnish words correctly. But she said "hoten" through the whole thing instead of "hoten." It was so hard to listen to that. It was really weird.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upa.org or www.upnotable.com.